2025, having an API gateway in front of your application is orthodoxy at this point. It wasn't that long ago, the idea was completely foreign. There was a very short transition period from nobody has a gateway to almost everybody has a gateway.
You can go from mild to wild on something like that. What you see in those approaches is everybody's doing something a little bit different. Everybody has their own standards. Everybody has their different authentication patterns, their own core standards, their own routing, their own versioning. It's the Wild West. That's just not sustainable. It's not scalable. And it's going to stifle your ability to deliver quickly because everything is a little bit different. You've got 14 different address models. You've got 5 different ways of versioning. This team isn't even versioning. You just hope and pray that they don't ever change anything or have a property change because you'll have production outages for it.
All right, we're up.
New episode.
This is good. I was just thinking about an event last night with a bunch of people we've known before, and the number of people that were commenting about how much they're seeing our faces in their social media feeds from these videos was pretty funny.
And they log into LinkedIn and there it is.
We're just in their face. Sorry.
Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully it helps. We're not there to yell at them in person anymore. So now they have to listen to us virtually, so it'll work out. But it's been fun. We're going to talk about a cool topic today. This is something that Jason and I both have a lot of experience with in running API gateways, platforms and API platforms. And, we're going to get into some of the nuance of this. And having an API gateway in front of your application is orthodoxy at this point. Like, it's so obvious, but it's funny for me, like it wasn't that long ago where the idea was completely foreign. This is one of those things that it was almost, there was a very short transition period from nobody has a gateway to almost everybody has a gateway. It was one of those things as the idea popped onto the scene, it became self-evident that, oh, wow, this is absolutely a better way to do things. And so it's one of those interesting capabilities that really grabbed the world.
And the funny thing is that everybody's interpreting that a little bit different. Some teams will interpret it as a global gateway, which in my opinion is the right way, but others will bill it as my gateway, my precious. This is mine and for my own apps and don't touch it. This is my policies, my standards and stay away, which is, it's a way of doing it, but it's interesting.
When I was building, websites and APIs, it was just PHP with Apache, right? Like you didn't need it. Like, what's this gateway nonsense? Like when people first started talking about gateways or proxies or anything like that, I just thought it was kind of silly because I wasn't operating at enterprise scale. But then, once you get into enterprise scale, you realize the benefit of having that kind of layer. So I know a little bit about this, but you know way more. Like, tell us about like the ecosystem right now, like how you see, the difference between just having a gateway and, building an API practice. Like, what does that look like in an enterprise?
You can go from mild to wild on something like that. From a very mild or non-existent, everybody is doing their own thing. Everybody has their own gateway, my precious. And, this is my standards, or this is just, hey, it's just a proxy to expose these APIs to the internet. Nothing more, nothing less. That's one way of interpreting things. It's one that I don't necessarily agree with, but it's a way. What you see in those approaches is everybody's doing something a little bit different. Everybody has their own standards. Everybody has their different authentication patterns, their own core standards, their own routing, their own versioning. It's the Wild West because it's everybody doing just what makes sense to them at their time in their little world. But when you look at the more broader ecosystem that everybody is a part of, you see a pattern for this API, a pattern for that API, a pattern for this one, a pattern for this one, a pattern for this one. To your point about an enterprise and living in a large system, that's just not sustainable. It's not scalable. And it's going to stifle your ability to deliver quickly because everything is a little bit different. You've got 14 different address models. You've got 5 different ways of versioning. This team isn't even versioning. You just hope and pray that they don't ever change anything or have a property change because you'll have production outages for it. I've seen it. I've seen where a team will just change something. There's no way of knowing until they push the new missing field and your stuff starts breaking and you have an outage because of it.
When you say everybody, you're talking about a large enterprise where they've got all different business units or different technology groups, or like you think about a bank, right? Like you might have the wealth management people, you might have the banking people, you might have like the people that do the digital APIs, maybe the authentication stuff. Like those types of groups tend to kind of do their cluster and sort of come up with their own independent patterns. And I think what you're saying is like that sort of breaks a lot of the benefits of having APIs in the first place.
Well, I'll even go one step further with that. There are team standards where a team will develop an app within that space and you'll have variations and different flavors of a gentleman's agreement of a standard. It evolves, it changes, but there's no one way of doing that. What team am I working with? Okay, is it this version or is it that version? And it's even two teams in the same group will have very different ways of deploying an API because there are no standards. And so I've seen these conversations with the teams who are consuming those APIs, and you have to go through every single step every single time, and there's no reuse. It's all, okay, well, line by line, go to the fields and the different properties. Is this a person? Okay, let's go line by the person. It's hours and hours and hours of just going through the spec because there's no standards on it. I can go down that path for a long time in this, but the point is that it's a big time sink to have everybody having their own thing. And to the flip side of that, to the other end of the spectrum, where you'll have your platform, you have the platform approach, you have an address model, you have a person model, you have a user model, you have all these standardized types of objects, standardized versioning that everybody just has to abide by. That's the purest way of thinking of a practice as far as looking at the outcomes of an implementation. There's a lot more context there that we'll get into, but
how do you do that at scale? I mean, obviously, I've tried to do it. You've tried to do it. We've seen it done at various levels of success. It's always been an extremely daunting thing to me when it's like, okay, we're talking about hundreds or maybe even thousands of developers writing services and APIs and things like that. And what you're also talking about is you're also talking about like model management, right? Like, how do you make sure everybody's like fitting? Because you're essentially building an enterprise data model in a lot of ways. Right now, like the typical thing is everybody's got their own host name and their own domain model, like that they can just completely do independently without having to worry about anybody else. It seems like it's a coordination nightmare to try to, okay, no, all those people now have to bubble up into an agreed upon model, and they all need to sort of design their APIs the same way. And to your point, so there's like a similar approach. Even if you could get everybody on board to want to do that, that seems like an enormous undertaking from a training and education and kind of alignment standpoint. Like, what's that been like for you?
You're right. It is not easy. And that's probably on a more mature side of an API practice. There's a lot of things that you as a, hey, I want to do this API practice. I hear it's the new hotness. How do I do that? And so I think you got to take a step back and look at the full scope of what does it mean to have an API practice? What does it mean to have a mature versus an emerging API practice? And the way I think about this is there's 6 pillars to this. Pillar 1 being your standards and your governance. I have this written down here. There's a lot to it. And so it's something that you've got to really think about from your policies and standards. Pillar 1. Lifecycle management is pillar 2. Your automation and tooling, pillar 3. Security infrastructure, pillar 4. Developer experience, you've got to think about the developers and usage of the platform. That's pillar 5. One of the more important is probably behind your security is monitoring and metrics, is so having all those across the board defined. And so the way we've been talking about the standards of some of the response items, that's probably one of the hardest things to do. Yeah, there's some benefits to it. There's time savings of it, but really the whole point of having an API practice is so that you can have your policies and standards across the board for you must use authentication. You must have a type of authentication. You must be using OAuth 2. You must version in this way. So these are the things that are the easiest, and you're not going to get into those contests about, well, I want my model. I want my model. You can force them to have an API spec. I kid you not. There are teams today in these large enterprises who do not have an API spec or a contract. It's just a go hit the endpoint, and those are the fields you get. Okay, but as an API platform, you can mandate you cannot deploy unless you have a spec. Now, is it a good spec? Is it a bad spec? That's a different discussion. That's probably on phase 2 of it. But you can also start mandating that you have done your security testing and the tests pass. Kid you not, there are APIs today, maybe not anymore, but have gone to production with no authentication today in these banks. They find out through an audit, or somebody has just found like, hey, I was able to hit this API in the lower environments without a token on it. You can see some people going quiet and you see typing, and an incident now is fired up. So it happens. It's easy to do when you don't have that central guardian to watch it. And that's why it deserves its own pillar of your security and infrastructure. But really the end of it is just, you got to start looking at each of these pillars individually to start to hone into, what am I doing? What outcomes am I expecting? What are the easiest things to do today that's going to have the biggest impact? Now, time saving, yeah, that's a big one. That's probably a big item on your list of developing an API practice. But more important than that is your security and being able to mandate that an API cannot go to production, will not ever go to production unless it's using an approved authentication pattern.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the one, right? Like whether it's been places where we've been ourselves or with customers, the real driver behind the API processes and things like gateways is it provides so much security benefit, right? Like even if you don't do some of the stuff you're talking about, which I mean, obviously you should do, but if you think about like some of the networking possibilities, like some of these companies, they move to cloud, whatever, and then they've got a million services or a million APIs that are all on the internet. Like that's not great from a network security standpoint. Like you've got all this stuff that's wide open. You have all these ingress points and it's expensive. It's hard to monitor versus if you have a gateway, and we've helped design this architecture before, right? Like you can create a DMZ, right? Like, and you can have a proper DMZ where you sit the gateway on the internet. None of your apps themselves can be hit by the internet, right? The network traffic comes in and stuff can proxy down, but there's nothing else that's in those subnets and all those different things. That can provide a lot of security benefit. One of the benefits of the gateways is, and if you build your proxy right around your contract, as you say, is the amount of surface area from a security standpoint shrinks by like 99.9%.
It's
right? Like
significant.
It's literally like you have the broad side of a barn down to a pin drop, right? In terms of, now it's not that you still can't be hacked. It's not that you still don't need all those other things. But if you think about putting a WordPress site out on the internet versus an API with a spec behind a gateway, it's night and day without having to do anything different. It's night and day in terms of the amount of security you need to worry about, because you're going from a default open to a default closed, right? Like you have to request exactly what's predicted in the format. You got, validation, all that type of stuff happening completely away from your data, completely away from your business application. And so there's just so much benefit from that.
And just to be clear, just to make it crystal clear, that just slapping a gateway on top of an existing service does not count. You still have to close off those other ways to get to the application and only allow the gateway to talk to that.
Yeah.
I've seen that. There's an instance I've been on where like, yeah, we were on the gateway. It's fine. But did you close off the other ways? Well, no. Did you have a WAF there? No. Did you have any other? No. Completely unauthenticated. It's just wide open, and it doesn't count.
Yeah. No, so I mean, we've had this conversation with DevGrid, right? Like we do a lot of Lambdas, right? And API gateway proxies directly into Lambda. Great. There's no way to hit the Lambda from the network. You have to have an IAM policy that allows you to do it. Great. So like that you automatically get, but then we started to do more with containers. So we had kind of traditional services and things like that. And the only way to let that hit was to put it on the internet. And so we went through a thing, oh man, we don't want to do that. So we had to figure out a way to lock it in and, make it so we were only allowing traffic from API gateway. That was quite fun to make that happen once we did it. The cool thing, I think for us, like, and being CI/CD and using good, kind of DevOps patterns, we have like a key rotation on every single deployment. It changes the key that authenticates those things. And, there's some really good opportunities to make that as secure as possible. So,
right. And I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier about just the sheer challenge that people face on this. This is not something that you do alone. This is not something that can ever be just done alone in a vacuum. This is a partnership between your development teams, your architecture, your security. It's an all hands on deck to make sure that everybody is getting some words in here. And when I was setting this up before, getting pushback from feature teams, like, I don't want to do that. I'm going to keep doing it my way and escalating. And so hold on, let's pause for a second here, because this is not just me mandating things from my seat as a platform owner here. Calling in all of the security architects, the enterprise architects, the security teams, and just like getting in a room together and say, hey, look, here's what we're doing here. We're trying to put in some of these mandates in a way, because we're seeing teams that are still trying to go to production without authentication. Unintentionally, but it's just a thing that security was not the first thought in their minds. But not just authentication, but also no authorization. It was a throw in an ID and you're going to get whatever values that you want back. And so we've got to tackle this from an all hands on deck approach. I'm like, oh yeah, cool. That makes sense. Let's do this. And so we went back and forth, and we drew up a bunch of guidelines, and they were great, effective. Here are the capital S standards that thou must do if you want to deploy an API. And given that you have the stamp of approval from all the heads of those departments, you get the teeth to really sink into these teams and say, no, I'm not making the rules. I'm just enforcing them. If you want to go fight this battle of not going to production, of going to production without these things done, go talk to the head of security. Oh, okay, never mind. And so you get the deferred or the teeth by proxy in a way, no pun intended there, but you get their teeth to use as a way of forcing these teams that just like, the reality is developers know better. They know that if given enough time, they're going to do this. But what I've seen is that they're just getting pushed so hard to just get to production now. We have a deadline. We've got to get this new API out because we got to make a bunch of money from this customer who needs it now. Push, go. And so the teams just forget, or it's just their production readiness checklist just goes out the window and we're going to go. Like, did you do this? Did you this? Well, no, but I got to go to prod. It's just by getting pushed so hard. And granted, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm not putting all the blame on any of the executives for pushing. It's their job to push to get it done. But the point is that it's not getting done. And so they want to go to production now. And so they're having incidents. They're having these outages, or they're having a security breach because it's just forget. The whole point of this platform is, we've said it a couple of times here, is that makes it so easy because you don't have to think about as much anymore, because all of that cognitive overhead of a team having to put all this and do all these checklists, all this and this and this for every single API, it goes away. You can just ship and make sure, like, hey, pipeline failed. Oh, I got to put that configuration in. Go, go, go. And it makes it easier. It makes the questioning of, did you do this security, that security, this cores, this pattern? No. Oh, but that's all in the gateway. It's done. It's already covered for you. Go, ship.
No, that's definitely super helpful stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's hard, but I mean, to your point, it can be company ending event if you don't do it right? Like, so it's like the gateway is a great place to provide that security blanket, not just for the app teams, but also for the business. And we've seen situations in my career over the years where, to your point, people put stuff in production where they check if you had a proper token, but they didn't actually check that the ID that token had the right to move the money from this account to that account. They're just like, oh, an authenticated token asked us to move money, so we'll just move money. Or like, these things do happen. I mean, it's terrifying and whatnot, but multiple institutions where I've seen stuff like that happen. And if you can have something at the top level that helps. Now, granted, that's not really something a gateway helps fix, but having those standards and having those questions essentially be forced to be asked in that context can help prevent those problems. Because often people, to your point, what'll often happen is maybe you have a service that's designed, and this is actually when the most egregious things happen. This is what I've seen happen. It's not that people are build something so foolishly. It's they'll build, like, use a money movement example that I just gave, right? Like, this is to move money from this account to this account. Well, that might be a service that they set up with very coarse-grained permissions on purpose, right? Because it's like, maybe it's something that's exposed to another layer internally. So it's like a service to service type of thing. And it's like, oh, if you're authenticated and you're somebody I trust, I'm going to move the money that you asked me to move, right? And then, oh, wait, let's use this service in this other context, and we'll throw the other authentication on top of it, and it'll be great. Nobody takes the time to realize, well, oh shoot, if we're going to use individual level authentication instead of service to service, we now need to add in all this extra authorization logic. They just missed that part. They didn't build it. It's not like they were building it for an individual service and they completely ignored those authorizations. Now, I mean, I'm sure those things happen too, but you just have to be careful. To your point, if the profile of the service changes, and this is where a gateway practice can really help, is like, this went from an internal service to an external service. Okay, here's the 30 questions we now need to ask you.
That's exactly, but also you can put automation around that too. And you go from simple automation to not so simple automation. You're doing a lot more checks, and you would even put a person to approve that the first time going out there. And that's going to be that guardian, say, hey, this is the first time you're going to production with this API. You've never done that before. I need you to look at every single bit of these questions. You're going to get on a call with me, and I'm going to grill you about this API. And if I'm not comfortable with what you've done here, it's not going. And I will get the security team involved to block it if I have to, because it's just a lot more to think about. That's probably the most egregious part there of service to service. Yeah, I'm going to trust the caller because that service must know what it's doing. But a human calling this now, that's a whole different story here, because humans are going to make different decisions than a machine will. They can do something egregious or harmful, unintentionally or intentionally.
In terms of ways to implement an API gateway, you're part of the Champions program for Kong, for their gateway. So you're kind of an ambassador for their product a little bit. I'm a big fan of like AWS API Gateway. Can you compare or contrast those for me? Like, why would someone choose one versus the other, or maybe something like Apigee if you're on GCP, or I don't really know the Azure product as well, but like, what are some of the options, and how would you help if someone asked you to help them determine what the right selection for their practice was? How would you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, just having something there at first that's the first step, right? That's step one, is at least you have something. But comparing the options here, I built APIs purely on API Gateway. There's not a whole lot that you can tune out of the box out of API Gateway. You can do some things. You can do rate limiting, make sure that there's an authorizer, but anything that's more advanced as far as forcing course headers from everything, that's a lot more complicated using API Gateway. If you want to have additional plugins, is what other apps will use. That's not out of the box with API Gateway. You had to basically put a Lambda in the middle there, and the Lambda would run something and check the API. But it's all Lambda based. API Gateway to a Lambda, then down to your Lambda or back to API Gateway. It takes a lot more to build something in AWS API Gateway and then some of these other providers that we're starting to see pop up. Apigee, it used to be good. I wouldn't choose it now. MuleSoft is out there. There's some people who are MuleSoft developers. If that says anything to you, if you have to have a titled developer to work on your API Gateway, you might want to rethink which gateway that you're using, because you're always going to be closed into the box of always needing a MuleSoft developer. Now, it might be a good product. I have never heard a good story out of it. I've always just heard about how long it takes. The one I have a lot more experience with is Kong, and it's not because of anything else other than it being a good product. When I've evaluated these products for bringing to a company, the criteria is, where are you hosting? Are you in Azure and AWS and GCP and on-prem? You're going to need something that can proxy down to any of those easily, and more specifically, a hybrid deployment model, so you can have that configuration, have that gateway in your own environment versus having to expose everything to the internet and have some custom routing to get to either a centrally managed gateway or a SaaS version of a gateway. But why I like the Kong gateway itself is it doesn't have proprietary configuration that you have to run. Now, there's some scripting that you can run there, but you can run JavaScript in a lot of these that's easy to use. To be fair, Apigee does as well. It's just very configuration heavy. It can be slow, what I've seen. Whenever I've worked on an Apigee, there's a lot of performance testing that you have to do with it to make sure that you're not making some bad decisions. The Kong makes it easy. Now, to be fair, you can do that. You can have performance issues with Kong too, so it's not get out of jail free card, but it does make bringing a gateway to production and having a hybrid deployment model very, very simple.
Yeah, the hybrid deployment model with Kong is definitely way better. Like, you just drop a binary. It's trying to set up Apigee yourself is almost insane, right? Like, it's like the complexity of managing everything you need to do for that versus the Kong piece. It's definitely, there's no question.
It's got a lot built into it too. And when I say, a lot, things that you'd want to run, the plugin ecosystem is pretty healthy as far as, mocking APIs. One thing that we don't think about in these is RBAC within the context of the gateway. What APIs can you deploy? What APIs can you manage? Built into Kong. So as an enterprise, you can safeguard your configuration from another team accidentally doing something and deploying over your API and taking down your production instance. Not all APIs can do that, or gateways can do that, and somebody could go in and inadvertently deploy over yours, or deploy 30 instances of their own, and now you've got which one is the right one. I'm monitoring all these things. You've got all these feature branch instances spun up, and now we've got tens of thousands of cleanup to do. Kong makes it easy, but also makes it so that you can safeguard your production from only the teams that have to have rights to modify it, and it's fast.
So I'm still a fanboy of the AWS API Gateway, though. Like, I hear all that, right? Like,
yeah, you would be.
I would be. I mean, I don't disagree with your analysis, right? Like, if you need a centralized gateway, AWS API Gateway is not great at that, right? It's not designed to be. And in fact, that's one of its strengths, in my opinion, right? Like, it's distributed. Sits out on the edge, which I really like. The gateway actually happens in their POPs, not just in their big data centers. You get that CDN aspect to it. Obviously, it's got all the DDoS and all that type of stuff built into it as well if you want it. But yeah, you're right? Like it doesn't centrally manage well. If you try to put a whole company on one domain on that and you're sharing that and the stages and all those different types of things, it doesn't scale particularly well. And also, it can proxy down to a data center. Like theoretically, you could do that, but it's not what it's designed to do. It's not natively good at that and probably wouldn't work super well.
No, and you got to think about what are you trying to have as your outcome here? Because, typical API practice is going to have an API inventory. What are all the domains that we've deployed under? Not the URI domain, but the models, the domains. What is the full inventory of an API? API gateway can't do that. Not unless you deploy to the same API, but that is not easy. I tried it. I've done it. Our APIs are all deployed to one API gateway instance. That took a lot of time to do, and I can't imagine doing that at scale to get that full inventory. But the benefits as well of these more advanced gateways is I can see at the bird's eye view of it's out there. I can see the full domain model. I can put metadata in there to say who owns that. I can know what team, what app ID that correlates to internally. There's a lot of metadata that you can attach in there to build your inventory because as a regulated entity at banks, other financial institutions, you've got to come up with an inventory. You have to provide the regulators with, okay, for all of these APIs, what's your governance model for all these? Here you go, auditors. Here's our governance model for all these APIs. Oh, okay, cool. Thank you. On the mild version of it, of using API Gateway, what's your governance model? Here it is. How are you enforcing it? We're crossing our fingers and hoping they do it. It doesn't work.
Terraform? No. Fair enough. Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation, right? Like, it's actually one of the reasons why I think that some of the work we do is important with DevGrid, right? Because you get into some of these things where the governance kind of is built into the individual tools, but like as we both know, right, getting a whole enterprise onto one platform is a challenge, and usually by the time you get everybody onto one platform, it's time to re-platform.
Yeah, and it's not about like doing it; it's what you can prove. And being able to prove everything, that's the point here, other than emailing a spreadsheet out. No. Centralized gateway has your inventory, has your governance, all built into it that you can download and prove. And here's an export of everything. And here's how I know we're safe. Here's how I know we are versus, hey, here's what somebody filled out on a spreadsheet that they've done. Do you know it's right? They said it was yes on the spreadsheet, so I'm going to trust that.
What else do people miss when they're trying to stand up an API practice? Like, what are some of the important keys that people need to think about?
It's not the first thing that somebody would think about, but the developer experience. When I've gone through replatforming gateways from one product to the next, I knew this was kind of a big deal, but I was surprised at the outpouring of support for, hey, we are only going to allow you to build your proxy by your API spec. Here's your open API spec, use the version 3, you upload that to the proxy, and that's going to build your resources. I can't even count how many messages that I got of saying, when is this going to be available? When? Because with other products, it's either XML or custom scripting or custom Terraform or all this hoops that you have to jump through. And they were saying, you're telling me that I can just upload my spec and it's going to build my proxy. Yeah. And just when. So that developer experience is super, super important because if it's hard to onboard an API to your platform, you're going to get people fighting back on it. They're going to say, well, I don't want to do this, or I can't do this, or we don't have time for this. And they're going to get exceptions to go around you, or you're going to have to then allow them to just push through because their executive or the CIO has escalated to your CIO, and now you're going to have to do it anyway. And so making that easy for somebody to get onboarded and say, just here's your spec, drop it in to the pipeline, and that's it. The developer experience is super, super important with this. Think about who your customers are. Your customers aren't the end customers. The customers are the developers that have to use your product. You're using patterns that are defined by security. You're using patterns that maybe you yourself have inherited the responsibility for. You're using patterns from enterprise architecture, but your customers are the developers that have to abide by those, making sure your documentation is on point. Your documentation for how to onboard is easy, and the onboarding experience is super, super easy. That will go miles to people wanting to fight you on your platform or fighting to get you the resources that you need to get it done faster.
Awesome. I like it. Anything else we should hit on?
I'm pretty passionate about these things because I can see the value of it. There's a lot more that we could get into that probably could take hours to get through. But we can do maybe a white paper, a drawing of this, what it means to have a good API practice. I think that might be a good thing that we could provide on the website in the show notes, something like that. That could be a useful white paper for if somebody's really, really passionate about this, wants to bring it to their boss, doesn't know how to start. I think, we can help you with there.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for digging into that, and thanks for everybody for checking it out. If you have any other questions, like Jason said, about, stand up your own API practice, give us a shout at hello@devgrid.io or comment on any of these things as you find them, and we'll try to help you out. All right.
Okay.
Cheers.
See ya.